So, can you briefly introduce yourself and your involvement with movement generation?
Sure. So my name is Gopal Interview. I am a stay-at-home parent. I'm 40 years old. I grew up in California, but I was born in Norway. My family's from India, and I've been doing work around racial, economic, and ecological justice issues, and actually looking for movement intersections and the intersections between different kinds of issues for a long time, for all of my adult life. I'm a preschool teacher in real life, but I've been doing political work a lot, and I work with a group now. The primary movement vehicles I work in is a group called Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. And Movement Generation was started, the Justice and Ecology Project was started a few years ago to kind of build the capacity of grassroots-based building racial and economic justice organizations in urban centers, primarily in the Bay, but now we work more broadly, to understand and embrace both an ecological lens, a sort of reflective, responsive stance towards place, and to understand the scale and pace of ecological crisis and transition, both in terms of the political moment and also in terms of the actual material reality. Historically, folks who are doing organizing in poor communities of color have historically, and urban centers have historically said, oh, environmentalism, that's about, like, that's what white people do around, like, saving nature or whatever. And or more recently, folks have had an analysis that said, oh yeah, the environmental justice movement is taking care of addressing the implications for poor communities of color, and actually we're saying no. The scale and pace of crisis and transition right now requires that everybody get in the game, that you understand what it means, and that you really integrate that into your work, and that we need a broad-based, multi-sectoral movement that's willing to address these issues and look for the interrelationship between economy and ecology. I am much more concerned about race analysis than I am about race. I'm much more concerned about class analysis than I am about class. Obviously, folks of color on the front lines of resistance to racism, institutionalized, personalized, and cultured, are obviously more likely to have a better or deeper or more complete analysis of the problem, obviously because of lived experience. But I don't presume that being people of color makes us more right, more revolutionary, more radical. It just makes us oppressed, and actually that's bad for you. We're against that. So I'm interested in supporting spaces where people are cultivating a race analysis and an integrated analysis, than I am in just organizing in spaces that are solely identity based. I think there's an important role for that in our work, but it's not enough. So the idea of folks getting together to attack questions of not just being, I don't even like the term anti-oppression. Of course I'm against oppression, but I'm actually for the abolition of privilege. Because oppression and privilege is one of those things. It's it's like wealth. It's entirely relative. There's no such thing as rich without poor. But it's not true. It's not true with free, right? Everybody can be free without anybody being enslaved or oppressed. But nobody can be rich without somebody being poor. So I think we should really be emphasizing the abolition of privilege and less emphasizing calling it anti-oppression allows us to imagine maintaining privilege and still being against the bad part, and it's actually not like that. And in the bigger sense of like the ecological work, and we have to understand that for everyone to live well, fundamental things are going to have to change about the way those who live better than others live now. And we can't pretend. We shouldn't lie to ourselves and think that everybody gets to live like we do. Like, no, we don't get to live like we do, so that other people can live well. When I say ecology, I am including all of economy, right? So just to take a big step back, it's an ecosystem is your basin of relations, as Brock Bowman calls it, or the relations of your home. And it's everything. It's your relationships to each other, to people. It's the relationships to the material resources, to the resource base, to the microbial life in the soil, all the way up to the air you breathe, like all of it. That's your ecosystem. People think of the ecosystem as some sort of like geological or natural boundaried system. So like people think of your ecosystem as like, oh, your watershed or your food shed. And actually, those things, those notions of watershed and food shed are actually economic relationships. Your ecosystem is the system of your home, and your economy is the management of your home. And so a ripple in a pond can be an ecosystem, right? If you define it by the set of relationships in that place. When you globalize the management of, so let me just step back. So you go into Trader Joe's and you buy a can of black beans and you flip over the can of organic black beans, and you flip it over and you look at the bottom and it says product of China. China is part of your food shed. China is now part of your food shed. So don't pretend that China is not part of your food shed because it wasn't grown within 150 miles of your home. It's part of your food shed because that's where you get your food from, right? So if you globalize the basin of your relationships, then you have to globalize the management of those relationships, which is the globalization of the economy. So now there's a single economy, right? And when you globalize the economy, its mistakes have systemic consequences. And climate destabilization is a good example of a systemic consequence of globalizing your home. So when we talk about ecology, we're not talking about nature. We're talking about the interrelated relationships between all material, all the material basis of life and all of the relationships within that. And so that's the first thing. And the mismanagement of our home, the implementation of a single economy has resulted in catastrophic and forward-going consequences. And probably the single most important way to understand those consequences is the massive and rapid collapse of the biosphere and the ethnosphere. The biosphere is that thin layer of the planet which can sustain life. It's the thickness of an eggshell to an egg. The cultures that are integrated into that web of life, and those cultures are defined by evolved knowledge of place. People who have developed a relationship to place over a long period of time. And that evolved knowledge of place is based on a reflective and responsive relationship to place. Right? Now what we've done is we're collapsing, we're attacking the biosphere and mining the biosphere for resources, and we're mining the ethnosphere, and we're collapsing the ethnosphere, and we're creating a single economy. We're taking all of those millions and trillions of economies and hundreds of millions of human communities over all of time and collapsing them into a single economy and a single way of understanding the world that actually doesn't have a whole lot of evolved knowledge. It's a very short period of time that we've built this entire economy on, based on the over-exploitation of non-renewable resources and the conversion of renewable resources into non-renewable resources. So we talk a lot about the exploitation of non-renewable resources like oil and coal, but we don't talk as much about the conversion of renewable resources into non-renewable resources. Probably the single most important one is human labor. Our work, our labor, is a renewable resource. But through systems of exploitation, slavery being the obvious one, but all forms of exploitation of labor, convert it from a renewable resource into a non-renewable resource. A forest is a renewable resource, right? But it can be converted into a non-renewable resource. It's water. Every drop of water on the planet is every drop of water there ever will be on the planet. It just goes through cycles, right? And when you disrupt that cycle and turn your fresh water into salt water, you're turning a renewable resource into a non-renewable resource. Water, it's not that water is going anywhere. It's not like we're running out of fresh water. We're converting fresh water rapidly into salt water at a rate at which the planetary systems can't accommodate.